Okay, so here's something most people brush past when Scream 6 came out, and I genuinely think it's one of the most important things that happened in that entire movie. Not the subway attack, not the Ghostface shrine, not even the legacy killer reveal. It's a quieter thing. It's the fact that Tara Carpenter, this girl who spent the first film essentially being the emotional punching bag of the story, is now standing in a New York City apartment looking at Chad Meeks-Martin like he might actually mean something to her. And the franchise will never be quite the same because of it. I know that sounds dramatic, but just stay with me here because I think there's a version of this conversation that a lot of fans haven't had yet, and it's long overdue. Because what's happening between Tara and Chad in Scream 6 is not just a subplot. It's not just a little romantic B-story to make the kills feel more personal. It is, in a lot of ways, the emotional architecture of what this new era of Scream is trying to build. And if you understand that, suddenly the whole thing hits differently. Let's go back to Scream 2022 for a second. When we meet Tara, she's already in survival mode before the title card drops. She's attacked in her own home. She's hospitalized. And for a huge portion of that film, she's kind of reactive. She's someone things are happening to, not someone who's actively steering the narrative. Which makes complete sense for that story. She's the inciting incident. She's the wound that pulls Sam back to Woodsboro. But here's the thing about Tara in 2022 that I think gets undersold. Even in that state, even while she's being manipulated by Amber, even while she's lying in a hospital bed, there's this quiet stubbornness to her. A refusal to just be helpless. You can see it. She's scared, but she's not soft. And that tension is what makes her interesting going into the next chapter. Because by the time Scream 6 picks up, something has shifted. Tara has moved to New York. She's in college. She's surrounded by the core four. And on the surface, she's doing the thing where she pretends to be fine, going out, living her life, acting like she didn't almost die multiple times. But Jenna Ortega has talked about this in interviews, and I think she puts it really well. She's described Tara as someone who's essentially in denial. Not because she's weak, but because admitting how broken you are means you have to stop moving. And Tara cannot afford to stop moving. That defense mechanism reads on screen in every scene she's in. There's this wall she has up, this calculated casualness. And Ortega plays it with so much precision that it almost flies past you if you're not paying attention. And then there's Chad. Mason Gooding, who I genuinely think doesn't get enough credit in these conversations, is playing someone who sees through all of that. Chad isn't a complex anti-hero type. He's not brooding or mysterious. He's kind. He's warm. He's the person in the group who actually asks how you're doing and means it. And in a franchise that has historically used the men in its story either as killers, as victims, or as love interests who exist mostly to be endangered, Chad is doing something slightly different. He's functioning as an emotional anchor. He's the person in Tara's orbit who isn't performing strength. And that contrast matters enormously because it's exactly the thing that would terrify someone like Tara the most. Think about what it means for a girl who has built her entire post-trauma identity around not needing anyone to suddenly be confronted with someone she might actually need. That's the real horror in Scream 6 for Tara, and it's not a ghost face. It's the possibility of genuine vulnerability. And that is such a Scream thing to do, by the way. The franchise has always understood that the scariest thing isn't the mask. It's what you have to lose. Sidney Prescott's entire journey, across 5 films, was fundamentally about whether love was worth the risk. Every time she let someone in, that someone became a target. The emotional cost of attachment in the Scream universe is brutal, and the films know it. So when we start to feel the pull between Tara and Chad in Scream 6, we're not just watching 2 young people flirt at a party. We're watching the franchise set up its next emotional pressure point. Because here's what's genius about it from a horror mechanics perspective. The moment the audience starts caring about whether 2 characters end up together, the threat to either one of them becomes exponentially more intense. It's not just about whether Chad survives the film anymore. It's about what his survival or death means for Tara's ability to ever open up again. And vice versa. The romantic tension isn't decoration. It's a weapon the filmmakers are loading for future use. Jenna Ortega has spoken in various press contexts about wanting Tara to have more agency as the series continues. She's been candid about the fact that she didn't want the character to just be Sam's little sister forever, or to exist primarily in relation to other people's arcs. And that ambition maps directly onto what Scream 6 is doing with the Chad dynamic. Because for the first time, Tara is making a choice that is entirely hers. Not reactive, not survival-based, not about her relationship with Sam or her past with Amber. The thing she feels for Chad, even when she's resisting it, even when she's being stubborn about it, is the first thing in this story that belongs completely to Tara. And that is genuine character development in a franchise that doesn't always slow down enough to let its younger characters evolve organically. Now let's talk about where this can go, because this is where it gets really interesting and honestly a little scary in the best possible way. If the writers lean into the relationship and let it actually develop into something real by Scream 7, the emotional stakes reach a level this franchise hasn't touched since the early Sidney and Dewey and Randy era. You suddenly have two people in the core for whose survival isn't just about plot momentum. It's about the future of each other. Every attack sequence becomes almost unbearable. Every moment one of them is separated from the other is a source of dread. Think about the subway sequence in Scream 6 and how effective it was. And then imagine watching a version of that where the audience knows exactly what Tara losing Chad would mean to her developing sense of self. The horror amplification is real. But here's the other possibility, and this one is maybe even more interesting to think about. What if the relationship falls apart? What if the weight of living this life, always running, always looking over your shoulder, always being someone Ghostface wants to destroy, makes something like a real relationship impossible to sustain? The Scream franchise has a history of that kind of heartbreak. It's not optimistic about love surviving trauma intact. Sidney and Mark Kincaid feel like an exception, a hard-won piece at the end of a very long war. But the path there is littered with relationships that couldn't survive what the characters went through. If Tara and Chad fracture under pressure, if the trauma pulls them apart before they ever really get to begin, that's its own kind of devastating story. And it would say something true and painful about what it costs to live inside a horror narrative. Either direction is rich. Either direction carries weight. And the fact that this pairing has generated this much narrative possibility from what is essentially still early-stage storytelling tells you everything about how well it's been set up. What I keep coming back to, though, the thing I genuinely can't shake, is that Tara and Chad might be the first relationship in this franchise that is being built from scratch rather than inherited from a previous story. Sidney came to the films with Billy already in her past. Gail and Dewey had history. Every major relationship in the original trilogy was already partially formed when we arrived. But Tara and Chad? We're watching the whole thing from the beginning. We're in the room for the first awkward, almost moments, the stubborn deflections, the slow softening. And that makes us complicit in it. It makes us emotionally invested in a way that is, quite frankly, going to be used against us at some point. This franchise isn't going to give us something this tender without eventually threatening to take it away. So the next time someone tells you the romance subplot in Scream 6 is just filler, just a little something to give the characters depth between kills, I want you to remember this conversation. Because what's really happening is that the Scream franchise, this incredibly savvy, incredibly self-aware piece of horror mythology, is quietly building the emotional bomb that the next chapter is going to detonate. And Tara and Chad aren't just a cute pairing. They're the fuse.